A resident physician can score in the top 1% on their pharmacology exams, correctly identifying every drug interaction on paper. Yet place that same resident in a chaotic emergency room with a crashing patient, and they can completely freeze, unable to execute a treatment plan. Educational psychologists call this the transfer paradox. It occurs when a student demonstrates high academic competence in a controlled environment, but is unable to apply that knowledge to solve real problems under conditions of uncertainty and high cognitive load. When this happens, we tend to blame the student for lacking practical instinct, but the data points to a systemic failure in how educational programs are constructed. For centuries, university curricula have been designed around the rigid boundaries of academic disciplines: biology, chemistry, physics. They are not designed around the complex, overlapping structure of actual professional work. Reproducing a fragment of theoretical material on an exam requires a specific cognitive skill. Integrating multiple fields of knowledge to solve ambiguous, real-world problems requires an entirely different one. The 20th century was dominated by atomistic instructional design, driven by frameworks like Bloom's taxonomy. We isolated knowledge into discrete blocks: a lecture here, a seminar there, a lab session on Friday, and expected the student to stack them together. But under real-world pressure, the entire stack is prone to shattering. Teaching a complex skill piece by piece fails because it deprives the brain of context. Without context, the mind cannot form the deep associative links required to recognize patterns and solve ambiguous problems. The solution to this fragmentation is the four-component instructional design model, or 4CID. Developed by Jeroen Ham-Marienboer, this approach abandons piece-by-piece teaching for a strictly holistic architecture. This model shifts the focus from the organization of academic disciplines to the integration of knowledge, skills, and attitudes through the performance of authentic professional tasks. Building professional expertise requires a transition to designing the entire cognitive environment, rather than managing a sequence of lectures. The first component is the learning task, relying on whole-task practice. Instead of isolated fragments, students experience the entire problem cycle immediately. We sequence these into task classes. A medical student moves from practicing on a routine infection to a complex polymorbid patient. Within each class, the scenarios must vary. This high variability intentionally drives up cognitive load, creating what psychologists call desirable difficulties. When students face varied, difficult contexts, their short-term test scores often drop. But this early struggle forces the brain to build flexible mental schemas, which is strictly required for them to transfer that knowledge to novel situations later on. To support the student through these whole tasks, the 4CID model accounts for a critical reality. Human memory processes information through entirely different biological pathways. First, the declarative memory system, anchored by the hippocampus, handles conscious reasoning and non-routine problems. Second, the procedural system, driven by the basal ganglia, compiles automated actions that run quickly and without conscious effort. A biological gridlock occurs when education tries to cross these wires. Delivering a 50-minute lecture on the precise mechanics of tying a surgical knot is ineffective, because listening to a lecture does not activate the striatum, where that automated skill lives. By separating educational material into these two distinct biological pathways, designers can prevent the cognitive overload and skill degradation that occurs when non-routine thinking and routine automation compete for the same resources. The declarative hippocampal system is targeted by the model's second component, supportive information. This is the theoretical framework, the mental models and cognitive strategies a student needs to reason through the unpredictable, non-routine parts of a task. In digital learning environments, this component faces a severe threat, known as the transient information effect. On the left, a long, dynamic video lecture disappears from the screen frame by frame. The student's working memory is forced to hold on to vanished fragments while processing new ones. On the right, optimal learning. The video is short and accompanied by static, persistent visual anchors that remain on the screen. Theory must never be memorized in a vacuum. It must be a permanent, searchable resource the student can apply exactly when solving a task. Meanwhile, routine, highly repetitive actions are handled by Component 3, procedural information, mapping to the striatum. These are the strict how-to instructions for operating a software interface or reading a medical chart. Because they are routine, they must be delivered just in time, appearing at the exact moment the student needs to execute the action, minimizing cognitive load. But there is a catch. If you continue to provide step-by-step instructions to a student who has mastered the routine, their performance sharply declines. This is the expertise reversal effect. External prompts actively conflict with the student's internal, automated schemas. To prevent this, procedural prompts must dynamically fade. As the action compiles into muscle memory, the instructions dissolve, relying purely on automated pathways. For rare, critical routines requiring total precision, like a surgical technique or complex formula, the model employs component 4, part task practice. This is isolated, intense repetition, designed to drill a specific mechanism until it requires zero thought. Without the automation of these routine operations, a professional's working memory remains chronically congested. They will be so focused on how to execute the basic steps that they have no processing power left for high-level critical thinking. Historically, implementing this model required immense human labor. Calculating exactly when to fade a procedural prompt or move a student to a new task class meant instructors had to manually track hundreds of individual data points. This dashboard shows how AI adaptive learning systems eliminate that bottleneck through dynamic sequencing. Machine learning algorithms track a student's reaction times and error patterns in real time. If a student performs a routine flawlessly, the system skips them ahead to a higher task class. If they struggle, it automatically restores the fading prompts. Large language models fulfill the role of the intelligent tutor, generating contextual explanations for the supportive information exactly when the student encounters a non-routine problem. For high-stakes task classes, where real-world practice is too dangerous, expensive, or unethical, like a firefighter navigating a collapsing structure, or a surgeon operating on a rare anomaly, spatial computing and virtual reality provide the required high-fidelity simulation, inducing the physiological stress needed to cement the schema. Digital tools translate the theoretical principles of 4CID into a real-time, responsive system for managing the learner's schema construction. A long-standing critique of cognitive models is that they ignore the emotional and motivational state of the learner. Modern implementations of 4CID address this by integrating self-determination theory. By giving students autonomy over the context of their tasks, letting them choose which specific datasets or scenarios they want to analyze, and providing precise algorithmic scaffolding that ensures they stay within their zone of competence, the model builds intrinsic motivation directly into the learning process. This matrix maps out how these 4 components translate across any modern delivery method. Whether operating in a traditional classroom, a blended cohort, or a fully asynchronous digital platform, the biological requirements for building expertise remain exactly the same. The future of professional work will rely on distributed cognition, where humans work in continuous tandem with artificial intelligence. Relying on the fragmented transmission of isolated facts is an ineffective strategy for that environment. Aligning instructional design with the biological mechanics of human memory and leveraging adaptive technology provides a pathway to eliminate the transfer paradox and develop practitioners capable of handling professional complexity.